hanging over all of our discussions of the unseriousness of our domestic policies, but also America's role in the world, is the possibility that Donald Trump might once again be the commander-in-chief. Let me play this one soundbite, which, again, I'm not sure has gotten as much attention as it deserves. Here you have Donald Trump, who has dined out for a long time as a big defender and supporter of Israel, but he was... we don't have all of the sound bites, but unstinting in his attacks on Benjamin Netanyahu. By the way, which I think is very, very interesting that he's broken with Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, does it, to figure out why Donald Trump is dumping on the Israeli government right now, right? Because Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged the fact that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election.
And said nice things about Joe Biden.
And said nice things. But this is Donald Trump saying something nice about the terrorists who have unleashed this horror. Let me just play this and get your reaction on the other side.
And then 2 nights ago, I read all of Biden's security people. Can you imagine? National defense people. And they said, gee, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack from the north because that's the most vulnerable spot. I said, wait a minute. You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it. You know, I said that President Xi of China, 1.4 billion people, he controls it with an iron fist. I said, he's a very smart man.
That's smart, yeah.
They killed me the next day. I said he was smart. What am I going to say? But Hezbollah, they're very smart. And they have a national defense minister or somebody saying, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack us from the north. So the following morning they attacked. They might not have been doing it, but if you listen to this jerk, you would attack from the north because he said that's our weak spot.
Oh, okay. So, Tom, I don't know how to unpack all of the stupidity there. So I'll let you do it.
He just thanks. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, that's right.
First of all, I'm always struck, and it's happening more and more these days, how much like a little boy he sounds.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
like a little kid. The sing-songy voice, and he's just. It's. I mean, he really is just. As like somebody the other day pointed out, that even by his standards, he sounds like he's really losing his. But imagine any other Republican candidate saying Hamas is really smart. And you got to hand it to Hamas, basically.
You just got to hand it.
You got to hand it to
Can I just throw in that President Xi, who rules 1 billion people with an iron hand and
fist.
Engages in extrajudicial killings and stuff, he's smart. I mean, it is interesting. Another tell what Donald Trump admires, what he thinks is smart. Brutality is smart. Oppression is smart, right?
Admirable.
Okay,
it's admirable. And so
top of the show.
Again, let's do the historical, what if there's, I don't know, Mitt Romney saying, and got to really hand it to Hamas. And I really, when I look at Vladimir Putin and see how he rules that former Soviet Union with an iron fist, and he doesn't let anybody it would be the thing is Donald Trump. And you and I have said this for years now. He has worn us down into just going, yeah, it's,
right.
What can you do? Because I think part of that, and I actually brought up the little boy voice with a more serious point under it, which is that he does the little boy whiny, sing-songy toddler thing almost in part so that you don't hear how horrific the thing is that he's saying. Because if he stood there and said in a very adult, calm voice, I think Hamas is very smart. Mm-hmm. And, she runs and Hezbollah, and you got to hand it to him. And China, and that look, there's 1 billion people in China and he rules them with an iron fist. People would say, oh my God. But because he does the whole performance art, for Rube America that loves the little boy and the hands and the pinky extension and all that, it's almost like you lose sight of the fact that he's saying things that are horrifying. That would be a career-ending comment for any presidential nominee. And that and just to go back to that Republican base, if any other Republican nominee had said that, the Republican base would destroy him. Trump gets a pass because I bet you've talked to many Trumpers who do this. Say, well, I understood what he meant.
Right.
He didn't really mean that. I understood what he meant.
Or I didn't see that. I didn't hear that.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah. No, I mean, to their credit, some of the Republican candidates have been pushing back. I think Mike Pence pushed back on all of this. Ron DeSantis even pushed back on all of this. Nikki Haley.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. Good luck with that. But and the Israelis issued a very strong statement saying, how unconscionable his comments were. Will it make a difference? I think it's naive to think that it will. Okay, so let's talk about Joe Biden's response. It's interesting to me how it is become this talking point that not only is this Joe Biden's fault because he projects weakness, but that, in Tim Scott's words, he has blood on his hands because he's had dealings with the Iranians. Now, my understanding is the administration working with Qatar has refrozen the $6 billion, which was the talking point for the last week, that this financed it, that $6 billion in Iranian money that was unfrozen. This is what was used to attack Israel. Apparently, it's been sitting in the bank the whole time. No money has been transferred, and it's not going to be transferred now. But give me your reaction to the way Joe Biden has handled this so far.
I'm an admirer of Joe Biden's foreign policy because it's the only times I've really been critical of him is when he goes into gaffe mode and he says, "My God, we have to take Putin. Putin has to go." And I wrote about that. I'm like, okay, Joe, this is the Joe Biden that was always entertaining, and with no filter. But you're president now, and there are things that you shouldn't just explode in public about. But I think, he gave his speech on this, his address on this, pure evil. This is, we stand with Israel. I mean, I think it should tell you how good the response is that the Republicans have had to resort to lying about it. Like Ted Cruz saying, "Oh, it was days before Biden said." No, that's just, it's not even a difference of interpretation. It's flat out false. Or Tim Scott. And are we now at the point where can we stop taking Tim Scott seriously insofar as we ever did?
That wasn't something of a surprise because, there was that wish casting that Tim Scott was the more reasonable Republican, and he's the one who gave the most, I think, deplorably demagogic reaction, the blood on his hands, which again, we can have a debate later about our foreign policy, but to say this days after the Hamas terrorists go in and slaughter all of these people, the rapes, the kidnappings, and to say that Joe Biden, that's the kind of hyper-partisan rhetoric that used to be taboo. And I certainly remember people were critical of George W. Bush in the days after 9/11. There was the Michael Moore video and all of that. But I don't recall any prominent Democrat saying in the wake of the attack on the World Trade Center that George W. Bush had blood on his hands. No one engaged in that kind of rhetoric, and certainly not a presidential candidate, no matter how much they might have opposed his policies afterward. Nobody in the week after 9/11 was saying the kinds of things that Tim Scott is saying this week.
But you could have seen Scott going down that road if you watched the last Republican debate, because you could already see him saying, "Yeah, this good Republican shtick isn't getting me anywhere. It's time to go down, time to head down Crackpot Boulevard," and that's where they are. I think in Israel, look at the way the Israelis have handled this. I think, for example, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is going to have a lot to answer for. This was
there should be career ending for him.
For 9/11, you had this one. People on the left in particular really wanted to kind of nail Bush on. Well, there was this one thing that said Bin Laden intends to do something bad,
right?
Which was this kind of no. That, or in other words, it's Tuesday. And he wants to do something bad inside the United States. Again, that a finding so anodyne that you probably didn't even have to classify it. Compared to that, this is a gigantic intelligence failure in Israel. Massive. These camps. Just yesterday, I think it was I want to give credit to the right people. I want to say it was NBC showing, that the photographic evidence. I mean, come on, you could do this with Google Earth, watching these camps at some point. But you know what? This is not the time. And you got to give credit to the Israelis who have said, what we're going to do? We're going to create a war cabinet, and it's going to bring in the opposition, and we're going to legislate and be able to pass bills about the war. This is where, and I said earlier, being a political scientist, I was not most political scientists love parliamentary systems. I don't, but this is one place where a parliamentary system can be flexible enough to say, we're going to bring in the opposition. We're going to have a governing coalition. We're going to agree that it's only going to be about certain things. And I think for American politicians to talk about blood on President Biden's hands, when the Israelis themselves, where there is so much more culpability to be assigned, have said, you know what? We're going to figure that out afterward. For now, we're going to have a government of national unity, and we're going to pass bills that can prosecute this war.
No, and
shame on Tim Scott.
I agree with all of that. And it is premature to engage in too much of this. However, I have to say that I guess today on Friday the 13th, I just had the sense of the fragility of things. Yeah. How much in our lives in the world is so fragile, and that many of us have taken so much for granted. I think that probably a lot of people took for granted that Israel was this national security state with the best intelligence resources, the best defense possible. And yet I think that in retrospect, people will go back and ask whether or not and how Israel managed to squander that. How did they manage to be so vulnerable? Did it have something to do with the fact that they took their eye off the ball, that they engaged in this pointless culture war, that they turned on one another? Because there's a lesson for us too, because we're thinking that America is strong, America is mighty, America is invulnerable. And yet, as a deeply unserious country, we have been squandering one value after another, one resource after another. And is there going to be a reckoning for us? I mean, did we see that? Because it was so incomprehensible that Israel and everything we thought about Israel, that it could have, failed so dramatically. What does that tell us about the fragility even of the best and strongest nations?
One of the reasons I admire Biden's foreign policy is because Biden is a serious man when it comes to foreign policy. And he doesn't pay attention to Twitter or social media or culture war stuff. And I kind of like that. I mean, I think that's how you run foreign policies. You say, I like the kind of council of wise men approach. And it's not a perfect foreign policy. I mean, Biden's had his, Afghanistan.
We know.
There's the, which I've written about as a huge criticism of how he did that. But I think in general, I still think that's the better approach. The cautionary tale from Israel, and I think it was Haaretz that said something to the effect of, this is what happens when instead of running the country, you're trying to stay in office to avoid criminal prosecution.
Yes.
And I mean, that was really sticking it in and breaking it off pretty early in this war. But it was also a true observation. And I think that's the risk you take if Donald Trump comes back. And that actually, even without Trump, without Trump winning the election, he's already sucked in so much of our national attention and made such chaos out of one of our two parties that we need. Look, whether you like it or not, and I wrote this last week, America needs a functioning conservative party. We just do. For Donald Trump to basically immobilize a political party and millions of voters who can't seem to think about anything beyond Donald Trump. I mean, I had a call from an old friend back home, here in New England where I live. And he was talking about a mutual acquaintance. And he said, I can't talk to him. I can't talk about anything.
No, right.
About the
we
not
all
about
know
the
that,
war.
right?
It's just this stream of. He says no matter what you talk about, 10 seconds in, it's Biden's a criminal and Pelosi is a bleep a see you next Tuesday, and it just goes on and on and on. And that is corroding our ability to function as a country
on a more tangible,
an extremely dangerous world.
Well, in a more tangible level of all of this, and again, we've become numb to it. Remember when Donald Trump gave that speech talking about very clearly how he is going to destroy the deep state. He gets back into power. He is going to dismantle the intelligence agencies. Right? He wants to defund the FBI. Break down the
purge the generals.
Purge the generals, if not execute them. Imagine what that will do to national security if Donald Trump does what he is openly and explicitly saying he will do about our intelligence world, about the defense, about our justice system, about the investigative tools. And again, I think this ought to be a major issue. I mean, look, in terms of like weakness, I mean, we're already seeing Republicans, and I've said this several times on the podcast, Tommy Tuberville, even in the face of all of this, continues to hold up the military promotions. We still do not have confirmed ambassadors to these crucial countries because of this game playing. And yet, Republicans want us to think that it's the other side that's, showing weakness. You're about to nominate a guy who might pull us out of NATO, who sucks up to Vladimir Putin, who thinks that Xi is a genius, who again wants to tear down, 50, 60, 70 years of a national security infrastructure. And everybody's like, that doesn't project weakness.
And for what?
For
not
what?
Not out of any ideological conviction. Not out, I mean, in a way, I respect people of any political persuasion, even if I think they're hateful. I kind of respect sincerity or authenticity. This is the emptiest kind of attack. I'm going to pull out of NATO. Why? Because everybody thinks I shouldn't. That's why.
Yeah.
Because I can. There's a Henry James story. I'm going to go all literary on you. He always reminds me of the boy in The Turn of the Screw. This nasty kid who's being influenced by a bad ghost. And the governess says, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "To show you that I could, and that I can, and that I can again." Mm-hmm. And that, to me, that's all there is to this. Yeah. Is this just why? Because I can. Why am I going to blow this up? Because a bunch of people with some money will send me $25 and keep me afloat and keep me out of jail because I fight. And that my point, going back to my earlier point, you keep talking about if he comes in, he's told us what he's going to do. Yeah. But just saying those things is corroding us and weakening us right now.
Yeah,
because he's making millions of Americans who should be thinking soberly and seriously about foreign policy, about everything really, about the life in America, about the debt, about taxes, whatever. And instead, you have these people. They're talking about this, and they're saying, "Hey, kill the generals. That's a great idea. To defund the intelligence community. I'm all on board." And our enemies in the world watch that. They know this. They see it happening.
And you can't pretend it doesn't matter, because it's the former president of the United States who's the leading Republican candidate for president of the United States. Right. It's not like this some rando on Twitter.
Or some guy or a couple of guys on a podcast or some guy on AM radio at 3 a.m. when you're driving through the mountains. And you're picking up a signal from
those guys are now in the United States Senate. That is the same.
Exactly.